Welcome to the Knowledge Stack podcast. My name's Jason. Thank you for joining me. Today's episode is a conversation with Jessica Martin. Jessica is a serial entrepreneur. She's an enterprise strategist and a lifelong mystic. She has a best-selling book titled Unlock Your True Potential, Harnessing Control for a Blissful Mind, Body, and Spirit. And we talked at length about executive burnout. Burnout in the C-suite is kind of an interesting conversation. It's one of those things where you can certainly argue it's a woe is me scenario, or maybe it's a feature and not a bug. We talk at length about climbing the corporate ladder and trying to be successful in today's business world. And there's not a lot of attention paid, I think, to some of the psychological or even physiological impacts of high levels of stress and high levels of anxiety and this always on, always go world really having an impact at the top levels of an organization. So while a lot of people may take the position that being at the top of the organizational chart comes with certain levels of stress and certain levels of anxiety, the stress and even maybe some of the burnout is a feature and not a bug of that success. So it's a fascinating conversation with somebody that spends a lot of time in this space. So again, following my hope that this podcast, all of these podcasts, help educate and help share some knowledge in a domain that I am certainly not an expert in. This is yet another episode that is outside my wheelhouse, but provided me a lot of interesting information. Jessica even built an assessment that you will find linked in the notes below that might help identify some early signs of burnout and help you come up with some ways to help mitigate that. Jessica's bio information, the links to her website, and all of the information that we talk about in the episode will be available in the show notes. So I encourage you to check that out. I'm sure I will be having additional conversations with Jessica. She was great to talk to, very personable. And I can see why she does do a lot of speaking engagements. So with that, I hope you enjoy this episode. If you have questions or comments, I encourage you to put them in the notes below. Visit the website, subscribe, do all of those things. And I will very much appreciate it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jessica Martin. Thanks and have a great day. We're talking with Jessica Martin. She is a visionary leader and a human resource strategist on a mission to blend neuroscience and ancient wisdom to dismantle societal constraints. That's a mouthful. So I was intrigued by Jessica's bio because she talks a lot about the burnout in the C-suite and I guess in organizations in general. So I wanted to talk to her a little bit about burnout, and let's first level set and let's talk about what is burnout, and are you specializing in burnout for C-suite executives, or is this cross organizational burnout?
That's a really good question, actually. Well, multiple questions. There's all these definitions out there of burnout, and let's put it in this construct, and the WHO has finally recognized it, but it's not something that we can say is a medical condition. And we're going to see that evolve. We're going to see it evolve in our construct of society, because the reality is society as a whole has gone on hyperspeed. And so when we look at how we evolve and how quickly things are evolving, and it's not, yes, technology is a massive part we can all agree with, but we also see geography. People are moving all over the world, and it's no longer like, oh, we've been in this home 30 years. We've been here 5 years. Do we cash in now? Right? The paradigms we have in society are different now. And so when you look at burnout, it really is these situations where it's different for different people. Sometimes it can be that they were in a career for a very long time that and they're ready for a change, right? They're ready to move to something different. Sometimes it's an industry. Sometimes it's culture. And honestly, most of the time it's culture. And it has to do with some of the other topics you've talked about, which is these paradigms of individuals' understandings. And when you're addressing burnout, it is a psychological phenomenon. It is a mental challenge. And we all know, we've all heard all of the conversations about, stress does this to your body. And then once you get this stress in your body and you got those toxic hormones flooding you, you make poor decisions, you get terrible sleep, your health goes, everything falls apart, all these different things. Burnout is no different, but it's a perceived threat. So it's kind of like you've spoken about in some of your other conversations about system one and system two. There's another model that's called high level and low level by Dr. Travis, and he writes about it quite a bit. And when we look at that emotional reptilian, um, amygdala part of our brain that is making those emotional decisions, and then you're looking at the cognitive logical parts of our brain that are making logical decisions, they have to work together, and they're there by design, right? And so when you are experiencing a threat, the DNA in humans has a threat of these perceived burnouts. It could be just not liking a coworker,
Mm,
or maybe it's a 2025 initiative, right? It could be all kinds of things. And it's
sure.
just those little pieces create burnout. To just go a little deeper, because I know there's like some overarching conversations about burnout, but
Hmm.
I will say there's another podcast I was on where they were like, why do executives need to talk about burnout? They're the ones making us burnt out. And I thought, wow, that's a very clear perception if you go
Hmm.
scrolling on the internet. And the reality is people don't understand that executives are very, very prone to burnout. But there's a difference. You can't admit that you're burnt out because you're not allowed to. You
Hmm.
are the leader. But what people don't realize that when they become a C-suite executive, you're still not a leader, in the fact that you still don't have the decision authority to change all of the things in the world
Hmm.
that you would like to do. You still have a board to answer to. There's
Sure.
Everyone always answers to somebody. And so the burnout for executives is vastly underserved. It's vastly ignored, and it comes from both sides. You've got a side of all these people pointing at you, saying it's your fault. And then you've got a side that you aren't allowed to express because you can't be weak. So
Hmm.
I take this construct that I have for executives on burnout that's very discreet. Not only do we have the course where you have to actually be a C-suite executive, it's not like, oh, all high performers or middle management can be it. No, you have to be a C-suite executive. And then we take that, and oftentimes it's actually rolled out in companies and corporations, and we do it in pockets
Hmm.
of these peer pockets where it's like a group in an organization inside the company. And there's a lot of complexity to that. And then if individuals need additional support because of their unique situation, that's available as well.
So, what would you say to those that feel that certainly at the C-suite, that some level of burnout is a feature, not a bug? You're a high performer. You're climbing that corporate ladder. You're chasing that gold ring. What would you say to those that you're paying your dues to be in the C-suite? What would you say to those folks?
It's okay to be human. You can't, the funny thing is I say that, and the safe space to do that with is your peers
Hmm.
outside your company.
Hmm.
Because inside your company, it gets weaponized, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
then, and that's a culture thing. It's not just like this company or that company. It's a cultural thing.
Hmm.
And that part of our corporate construct hasn't evolved yet. I would also say that you can't do it very openly to anywhere else outside your peers with your company, because you will be seen as weak. I've
Hmm.
seen people who were genuine and saying, I am burnt out. I have this stuff going on with my family. We just shifted our company a completely different direction. I need help. And it was, suck it up, you're getting paid to do this,
Mm-hmm.
or their immediate, also very high level leadership was like, well, how are we supposed to help you? You're here for us.
Right.
You're very stuck. It's like when people first started getting divorced and one of the parents had to be both parents, or sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people were still together in those situations, right? But it's the
Mm-hmm.
same concept. You can't be both.
Mm-hmm.
And so where's your safe space? But you're allowed to be human. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's finding those things like us for we have our peer pockets, or finding executive retreats. In September, we're running one that is very specific to a niche C-suite group of executives.
Mm-hmm.
And the intent is to build relationships for them, because a lot of times you're so busy with work and then you've got your personal life that you don't have time to go seek out peers, mentors. And so it's giving kind of like under that construct of, come to this weekend retreat. The outcome of that is a very safe networking group where hopefully you can find one or two people to
Mm-hmm.
continue your journey with. So you're not experiencing burnout alone.
And you're already like-minded because you're already on the retreat. So, it is a safe space.
Yeah.
You mentioned culture a couple of times. What part does culture play into contributing to the burnout in the C-suite?
It's broad. So we
Mm-hmm.
first started seeing a major corporate culture shift in
Mm-hmm.
hiring in the 2000s, right? And because generationally, there was such a large shift of knowledge that in the early 2000s, what happened is our education system changed and our corporate norms weren't adapted to it. Well, 20 years in, they're still not adapted. I remember sitting in a boardroom and we're sitting there, and I was just being patient and listening to all the problems. And the one they got stuck on, they spent most of the conversation on, was we can't hire any qualified people. And I was like, no. Me and you would appreciate this, a CEO of an IT company, we were the only two going, no, it's not the people you're hiring. It's the system you're trying to shove them into. We taught all of these kids technology, and now we're telling them they're idiots or don't listen to them or can't evolve their careers for them because they don't fit in our old construct. And granted, like some companies are just now catching up, and you still see the trickle of this. And so that's where a lot of that DEI stuff came from,
Mm-hmm.
and, generational training and all these different things. When you have to look at your technology inside your company, is it evolved to the people coming in? Is
Mm-hmm.
your teachings, your culture all built around agility and true diversity, meaning you've got some people who are thought leaders inside your company that you're not listening to, and they're over there doing data entry still, which that blows my mind when I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait, who's doing data entry? But
Still
then,
happens.
right, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the
Yep.
industry, for sure.
Absolutely.
Uh, and then at the same time, you have people who have ex experiences and knowledge that they're still ongoing learning, but because they were able to adapt to that construct, they were able to accelerate more in that company or in that industry. And so there's this huge gap of fairness of what is actually working and what isn't. But when we go through the whole thing and look at it, it is, who are you hiring, and are they a fit in the culture that you're trying to develop? Because most companies are trying to change their culture to have inclusion
Mm-hmm.
and to have knowledge and to be able to keep up with technology, right? Because it's more now so than ever required that you are outthinking your competition.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Um, you mentioned some differences between generation. Um, is there a different tolerance level for um, burnout amongst the various generations. You know, they're your boomers, your greatest generations, even maybe some of your later Gen Xers are, you know, nose to the grindstone, you know, work 80 hours a week, do what you got to do. And then you get to the younger demo and it's, I got to work 40 hours a week. I don't know if I can handle that. Anecdotally, I would say 100%. There's definitely a different tolerance level. What have you seen?
I think we need a new business model.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go into that. But first, to answer your question, you hit it, right? We've got this younger generation, and I'm one of those like weird little slivers of the in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like you ask my kids who are grown adults and they'll be like, well, it's kind of weird because you're not Gen X, but you kind of are. And then at the same time, you really work with Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yep, yeah, I know. I'm in that weird sliver. But the you you take those people who each of these generations, they've had a different paradigm.
Sure.
They come with a different knowing, knowledge, acceptance. Um, they the newer generations are so quick to drop something and shift to something else, which causes a problem in the areas, and I'm calling it a problem. Some might just consider it a challenge in areas where there are things you have to stick to. You can't just change everything because there is no organized chaos when it's pure chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And in business, we kind of find our niche usually in organized chaos. So when you look at that, and then the people who are like, I don't know if you remember this, but when that book came out, Who Moved My Cheese? I was like, oh, yes. Where they're still stuck there. They're like, no, this is the way we do it. And
Mm-hmm.
some things, even like the legal system, right? I was having a conversation earlier today about that and how that has to adapt to be able to equate to some of these new experiences we're having in society just from AI,
Mm-hmm.
and how people are able to generate content from it. There's no laws around it. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There are. They're very
Mm-hmm.
loose.
Yep.
And where do you draw the line
Mm-hmm.
from independence and that? And so all those pieces come together, and with these generations and these gaps we're seeing that are closing, I will say corporations, especially inside of America, are they aware of it and they're trying to address it. But when you look at how they perceive burnout, like you said, to someone who is younger, might see it very much more quickly. They might accept it more because
Mm-hmm.
they've been given freedom of speech. Whereas we thought we had freedom of speech. And then we're like, why? That's inappropriate. Why are you talking about that? And they're like, because that's how I feel. Right. So there's like this gap there. And
Mm-hmm.
then the burnout for somebody who is more in the X and other generations, their tolerance is way higher because they have this paradigm of I come to work to do my job to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Their burnout typically is coming from the pressures of I come to work, I do my job, and I get paid. They want more from them. And
Mm-hmm.
then these younger people experience burnout because they have 1,000 different ideas when they wake up in the morning and they want to execute them. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you mean I can't do this? So, and I experience this in my own company because I have a diverse group of people. I have people still in college all the way to retired people all in my company, and
Mm-hmm.
we're global. So we have different time zones, and it's super funny because you see people create these spreadsheets with all these data and matrices and measurements and all these. And I'm like, well, now that you're done with that, let's go give it to this 30-year-old who can automate it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for the thoughts, but now let's put you somewhere else. And I
Mm-hmm.
use them because they have the traditional ability to document. They have the ability of understanding the value of retention. And so they kind of go in those roles of like, you are making our Bible. Like you are super critical to keep us all knitted together. And
Mm-hmm.
then someone who's like 30 and under, I'm like, okay, go be creative. Turn this
Mm-hmm.
into whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care. Make it work. And so I think this all comes back around to we need a different, more innovative business model that is allowing people autonomy in their roles, but not boxing them in their roles, in the ability to really give them the opportunity to understand themselves, continue to grow as themselves, and the flexibility inside the company to allow that happen. And it's not easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
I know even in my company, when I had this aha moment like 5 years ago, because I was like, okay, I can't freaking deal with all of you. I was like, I just destroyed everything one day. And I spent an entire week just in my office. And I had white, it was my husband's so gracious. He put whiteboards up everywhere for me as I'm drawing it out, trying to collect these thoughts and figure out where it was my brain was going. And I destroyed the hierarchical construct in our company, which is typical in a lot of companies.
Mm-hmm.
But it's built on people's skills. So if we create something new, which is not unusual for us, if we create something new, there's way we will share it through the whole group. And I'll admit there are employees I don't even know. But there's like 5 of us that are really in this circle. No one has different titles or anything. We'll put them up for, people to be able to process and cognize their influence inside the company.
Mm-hmm.
But what will happen is last month I met somebody who I was like, hi. And they're like, this person does this on your website. And I'm like, oh, okay. But they had an idea and
Mm-hmm.
they vetted it. And then they ran it through all those different topics we're talking about with our people generational opportunities, ran it through all of them. And then we're like, okay, now let's take it to Jessica. So she has the data. She can see all the information. She can see the why and how it's going to, like, what it's going to cost us to execute this.
Mm-hmm.
By doing that, it empowered everybody and has continued to empower everyone in the company to never settle. And
Mm-hmm.
every November now, we wipe the board. We go through everything, and everyone goes through their focus area, is what we call them,
Mm-hmm.
and they redesign what they get rid of what's not working anymore. They go out and find new automations, new software, new opportunities, new programming language, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go through and do all of that. And then we spend December putting it all into play and execute so that in January we start fresh. And by doing that, it's kept our costs very low.
Mm-hmm.
It's kept our overall, like, and I'm not just talking like technology costs, like even like our hours and our waste, all of those types of things come very, very small. But that's my idea on how to like make all of this work. And it prevents burnout because
Mm-hmm.
they're eager, they're excited to come to work. They know they're getting heard, they feel valued. It's harder for people to come into that culture. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what country. It's not just an American thing. They take a little bit to trust it. They come in very, like, they like the concept, and then when they get here, they kind of get a little scared over it, because they're
I
like,
can
no,
imagine. Yeah, it's a little stressful, maybe not knowing what your next year is going to look like in November. But I guess you spend that time in November and December to really kind of hash it out and make sure everybody's comfortable.
yeah, yeah, and they're
Interesting.
great. I'm
Mm-hmm.
amazed. Like, I don't know a lot of the things they do
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, that's
That's all
super
right.
cool. I don't understand it, but I really like it.
Yep. So we've talked about the C-suite. We've talked about employees. What about entrepreneurs? Starting a business, being the business owner, being sometimes the only business person in your organization. That's got to be a feature.
Yeah.
You need to keep the lights on. You need to keep the business going and growing, and hopefully you get to the point where you can bring on more and more people, and you can relieve some of that potential burnout. But how does an organization of one, how do they set themselves up to avoid a lot of these pitfalls that we talked about and a lot of the things that cause the burnout? If you're responsible for the culture, and you're responsible for your work-life balance, how do you balance that?
Pour some gas on it and light it. It's so funny you would ask. Like, it was actually this month, in June, where we have a program called Ready to Launch. And it is all about that. Like our first week, we're just going through the mindset, the paradigm shift, the balance of burnout. Because I've done it.
Mhm.
I have had businesses that imploded by, I had a great idea. I didn't realize the idea because I didn't do my research. I was like, I think there's a market gap here. And then I was like, oh my God, stop the ads. Um, so we actually imploded on ourselves. And within 2 months, we're out of business. And
Mhm.
now we have Uber. So
Mhm.
they obviously knew what they were doing.
Mhm.
But it is a matter of having a framework to prevent that burnout. People don't teach that. You go in and it is it is all consuming and drowning because
Mhm.
you're essentially taking your baby, your thought ideas, your instincts, your feelings, all these different things and your expertise, and you're dumping it in. And all of a sudden you have people marketing to you from all over the place, from doing your marketing to your websites to wanting to work for you and all this stuff. I don't even post job openings. No, you want to work for our company, you better start like figuring that out way in advance, because you're going to have to pitch to us why we should hire you and what you're going to do.
Mhm.
um, Again, that's part of our construct. It's weird in comparison to the current one of most corporations, but it's overwhelming because you have to wear every hat as a solopreneur. And right now, there's a 38% growth. It's not going to go away. It's been climbing. We're going to continue to see it climb. And there will be a plateau where it evolves. And again, that's why I think that the business construct needs this innovation of framework. But in the meantime, people are starting businesses and side hustles and doing all of these things because they're unhappy and they're boxed, and they don't want to have a financial cap. They might be in an industry that they loved and don't love it anymore, or that is capped or being automated, right? When I did that, when I closed our wellness center, the restaurant part of it, I was like, who wants to stay and get retrained? Let's figure out what you like doing. But that's not common. They'll just get rid of everyone in the restaurant and keep moving. But I was like,
Mhm.
these people freaking love me. They're loyal to our brand. Why would I do
Mhm.
that? I'm
Right.
like, I need that.
Mhm.
That's the most critical piece in hiring. But when you're an entrepreneur, your best, and I just truly believe this, and that's why we did doing Ready to Launch after years of consulting people starting their businesses. Your best bet is to create a framework and strategy with an execution plan. And if you're
Mhm.
not a project manager, hire someone to do it for you and design it for you. Because you really, especially today, you really have to hone in what your services and products are, what your own boundaries and core values are, and what your clients look like. And then you have to be able and willing to adapt and evolve around that as you are standing up your company and finding that before you go live out into the world.
Mhm.
Once you go live out into the world, the first 5 years of your business, you're going to continue to tweak it. And there's parts that you're going to close, parts you're going to open. You might just change your mind altogether and restructure your company.
Mhm.
It's very agile, and you have to be prepared for that. Along with, you cannot ignore any technology. You cannot ignore the value of staying current in all the hats you have to wear. It's
Mhm.
difficult. And so, again, that's why we have peer pockets, so that
Mhm.
it's like, hey, just hang out with other people like you. And then
Mhm.
because they will have interests in different areas and bring it back in and share it.
So, what kind of tools, outside of the technology and stuff, one of the things that you had mentioned is bringing together, excuse me, the neuroscience and the ancient wisdom. What are some of the, like, we when we have, executive planning sessions and we have, special guests come in, we talk about mindfulness and, finding time to, um, you know, think inward and, meditate and all those sorts of things. What are some other tools that a potential C-suite or, entrepreneur who might be starting to experience some of this burnout, what are some tools, what are some levers that they can pull to try and, mitigate the oncoming onset of full-blown corporate burnout? Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we go through this all the time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so first, I want to say something about mindfulness because I remember when it got introduced to me as a C-suite executive, I was like, that's cute. Um, and then it got shoved down my throat enough to where I
Mm-hmm.
finally did it. But usually I was just like, no, I'm not doing this. And now I'm like, holy cow, that's just scratching the surface of all of these things. Um, so I actually have taken it from mindfulness all the way into it's called Transcendental Meditation,
Mm-hmm.
tm.org. Huge fan of theirs. And it is phenomenal when you're dealing with the C-suite specifically. It's a form of meditation that helps you reprogram your brain. So it's not just that mindfulness of like being present and being in the moment. Of course, we all need to do that. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
if you were actually a C-suite executive, you would understand how complicated that is because you are getting, while you're in a physical meeting, your device is still blowing up. You're still, yes, exactly. I know. I've got three of them sitting right here. I get it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are still going. You
Mm-hmm.
have your next meeting you're prepping for. You
Yep.
have a HR issue from someone getting freaking their butt
Mm-hmm.
hurt in some other
Yep.
meeting you have to deal with before you end your day. And your spouse is asking if you can make the soccer game tonight. And you're like,
Wrong.
okay. And you want 10 million for what? What was that
Mm-hmm.
budget? What are you? And you
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to make a decision.
Yep.
It's too much. So
Mm-hmm.
what I found was most effective is taking that mindfulness into transcendental meditation and doing that practice. What
Mm-hmm.
ends up happening is you practice just 20 minutes twice a day. Do it in the morning, and
Mm-hmm.
then some other time. Usually we don't get to do it again until night. When we do that, it opens up that part of your brain to allow all those thoughts to happen at once.
Mm-hmm.
And it immediately starts lowering your blood pressure. And what it does is, even though mindfulness and other meditation techniques are there and they all do these things, with the one I saw, and this is why I think it's the most effective, is with transcendental meditation, it creates that as a sustaining thing all day long. So even if you have a day where you skip it or you're like sick, and so for like days you don't do it, the
Mm-hmm.
pattern's not gone. It's still there. And so you just, after 21 days of doing it, it's just like mind blowing. So I definitely do encourage C-suite executives specifically to go into transcendental meditation. You're going to find that way more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
There's EEG scans on it and stuff, which I won't bother you and your guests with, but because I can really geek out on the science of all of this. But when you go through it, they actually do go into the science and explain it before they even teach it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're off to the races. And it's very simple. There's other things too that I think that get overlooked for C-suite executives is you get lost in the noise. At some point you start going, I'm empty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, right when you're starting to go like, am I burnt out? Because I'm empty. I no
Mm-hmm.
longer feel zel when I wake up in the morning and have this huge desire that I can make change and transformation. I'm running through the motions. That is definitely a huge flag. And
Mm-hmm.
I always tell everybody, go back to your core values, not your corporate core values. Where are your core values? Then look at your corporate core values and how they align. Once you look at that, if there's pieces that you can pull out still, then you're good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, then you have to also you have a different construct of boundaries. I mean, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can look out what's out there in the world and in the Google searches and stuff for boundaries and how to set them up. They are different for C-suite executives.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to have some of those boundaries they say that you should have.
Mm-hmm.
And you will be told that and reminded of that should you break your contract or even, I don't need to go into it. So those kinds of concepts are different and your boundaries have to be different. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why you have to identify your core values first. Now, if you have an alignment with your core values and you have alignment with your boundaries, you are going to innately create a mini culture in your organization that
Mm-hmm.
is aligned with you. And that's when you still are waking up with the enthusiasm you had before. And when they're not aligned, is when you start struggling and going, it might be time to move on. Not because of the industry or because of the company. It could be one or the other or many things. It could just be your life changed or you had a situation and a new experience that created stimuli and transformed the way you were thinking. And now you're going a completely different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, it's not aligning anymore. And so you have to change. And
So if you're
mhm,
in that situation and you're feeling burnt out and you're feeling like you need to change, you have to do something different. How do you avoid falling into the same trap? What are some signals maybe early on in an interview process or maybe in your first few months at whatever this new thing is? How do you identify ahead of those things that are going to trigger this burnout feeling? How do you identify those things early so that you can try to avoid them, get heavier into the transcendental meditation, or hit the reset button again and find your next gig? How do you identify those things?
personally believe it's twofold. I believe in correct knowledge, true knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to have that, you need to have logic. So do some researching and studying of what is out there, right? Like human factors engineering is a newer construct that some people are not aware of. Some people are adapting it into their companies. There's a lot. It's very new into the market of being an organization inside companies.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have found that 10 years ago, even though it existed since, way back in the early 1900s,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
but we're just now accepting it. And that
Mm-hmm.
goes back to our original topic about how corporations are evolving. Uh, but when you're looking at that, you know, what is going on out there? What are the industries that are growing?
Mm-hmm.
What's the information look like? I do suggest scrolling, seeing, like, go incognito or go through DuckDuckGo or some other place that doesn't have your history,
Mm-hmm.
um, and scroll and see what is out there in the media. I mean, there's tons of tools you can use too, but let's just keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at what's going on in society and you're looking at what's going on with corporations and business in the world, because you have to look globally now, that's one piece. The other piece is about you. You have
Mm-hmm.
evolved, right? And my first area of study was psychology. I didn't think I was going to go full circle and come back into human consciousness, but here I am.
Mm-hmm.
But um, when you look at yourself as an individual, it really is that simple of core values and boundaries. We just don't take the time to reevaluate those things.
Mm-hmm.
No one takes the time to journal, yet journaling is so powerful. And it's literally pen to paper, not on the computer, not an audio recording. It
Mm-hmm.
triggers a different part of your brain when it's pen to paper. And if you just 5 minutes, 20 minutes, I don't know if I don't know who has time for more, but people do. Um, you know, but you
I
just
don't know
do
if I could write for 20 minutes. I think I'd get a cramp. That's an
right.
awful lot to write.
I know, right? Exactly. Mine just looks like gibberish now. People will be
Yes.
like, "What's that saying?" I'm like, "I know what it says. It's kind of hieroglyphics, but
Mm-hmm.
but it clears your mind, and
Mm-hmm.
it also helps you process your thoughts differently. And so, if you do that, especially at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of dump, it actually is relieving huge amounts of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you partner that with meditation, okay, we're talking 30 minutes a day you're setting aside for yourself. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't value yourself enough to do these things, are you really looking for something else, or are you throwing in the towel on life?
Hmm. Interesting. So for my tens of C-suite listeners or subscribers that are watching or listening to this podcast, um, as C-suite executives, as executives or even middle managers, what can we do to help our direct reports, our employees, our colleagues minimize the impact of burnout? And at the end of the day, we all have a mission to, meet whatever corporate goals our individual organizations set, and we all want to strive to do that. But how do we do that in a compassionate way that doesn't overwhelm the employees and subject them to the potential things that cause the burnout?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree with a lot of the language that has been shoved down our throats
Mm-hmm.
about, you know, listening, being authentic,
Mm-hmm.
inclusion. I've heard all of those things and seen the corporate models and the teaching, and it's all, I've not seen one yet that I'm like, you got it right. I'm usually like, okay, here we go again. And it's how you use the tools you have.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest advice is take them along your journey. So when I go into an organization, and we start these modules, they're short, and I believe in humanity, because there is it gets into all kinds of physics and stuff we don't need to go into with quantum, but the what we are missing and going to continue to miss more and more as we evolve is the human touch. We saw that and how people behaved after they came out of COVID, and we still continue to see that. And as businesses are trying their hardest to be agile and they are trying to adapt, I'm not discrediting that. But everyone's looking for the silver bullet of how to
Mm-hmm.
fix this,
Mm-hmm.
because their culture, when they restarted business back up, changed. So when you are taking your teams and your other leaders along the journey with you, by default, you are increasing your loyalty with them. They will be very loyal to you because you actually were authentic, listened, and cared. You can read. I always have a strong belief, and I beat this drum so hard last year. It was pretty funny, but there is street smarts and book smarts, and you have to have both.
Sure.
Right? And
Yep.
so if you are coming at everything from book smarts, which is what we really see with a lot of this automated training and consulting companies coming into our organizations, and I've got the solution for burnout. Burnout is a flooded market in automated modules. And I'm like, that's hilarious. Whoever thought that burnout, which is a human problem and a human experience, can be solved by clicking next in
Mm-hmm.
video modules.
Yep.
You can have that, but you also still have to have the human touch. And where do you cut when you're looking at the bottom line? You cut the human consulting piece out of that contract because it takes more time. So it's eating your overhead budget. And it's also eating what you're like, oh, we could do this internally. Oh, I'm sorry. Did that person have a psychology degree or a human factors degree? No.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's just my own little rant. But if you're taking yeah, you're welcome. As I digress, I'll come back to your answer.
You're
Um,
good.
the but when we're taking our employees along that journey, I've seen
Mm-hmm.
profound things happen, and I'm really believe in train the trainer. And so I think that if you are coming to me and you're like, hey, I want to change and I want my team to change, I would do a series of assessments and of my own that I'm doing while we're talking. So you're not getting, some other stuff, and using that to identify what the actual challenges are with you and your team,
Mm-hmm.
not against each other, but as a collective. What are some
Mm-hmm.
of these challenges we're having? And then look at the company culture and environment as well. And I would curate a program that was unique to your organization. And I usually go from the C-suite down. org
Mhm.
and curate something specific to your team,
Mhm.
but the whole time empowering you. So you're going to get the teaching and the coaching, and then we can deliver it to your team, but you are their go-to person to help embed that,
Mhm.
because then they're going to trust you more, be more loyal to you, realizing that you have this cognition as well, and you have this belief as well of whatever the change is that has to happen inside your team.
Mhm.
And by doing that, then they can roll it out into their teams. And that's how you actually penetrate.
Mhm.
Is they say, like, oh, you have to model the behavior. Yeah, but you've been telling people to do that and it's not working because the support hasn't been there. The ongoing journey hasn't been there. And so after it's done, in 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 weeks, 6 months, throughout the year, I'm going to call you and say, hey, how's it going?
Mhm.
Is this working? What's happened here? Sue had this going on. Jack had that going on. Jill ran down the hill. Where are we at? What can
Mhm.
we do to tweak this to continue to improve? Not because I want to come in and make more money. That's the only way it's successful. That's just
Mhm.
part of the program's package, because you're not going to be successful if you're going into a corporation and nickel and diming them through the whole process.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
You're good. I like the way you wrap that. Um, um, I think that's some good information. I'm going to share all of your details. I'll put that in the show notes. But this was an outstanding conversation. When we started, I told you that the whole idea behind this podcast is to expose myself and others to new ideas, and I think you did that well. I'm now equipped to handle burnout a little bit better. I will certainly look into some of the information that you provided, and I'll share that with my subscribers and listeners as well. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I have a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One question. Don't you see and think in your industry, you are seeing a huge amount of burnout, regardless of the C-suite role?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I mean, in technology in general, it's everything is moving at such a rapid pace. It's almost day to day, whether you're talking about crypto or AI, all of these things are almost on a daily basis changing and evolving, and it's hard to keep up with that stuff. And you mentioned earlier the generational divide between the younger and the older generation. The younger generation is really well equipped to handle the TikTok level speed of all of this stuff coming at them because they're used to 6 second swipes. So the older folks, I'm starting to count myself among them, are having a harder time keeping up with some of that stuff because for us, it goes back into the system one, system two thinking. We're a little bit more, deliberative. We're thinking a little bit more about things. And sometimes that's not compatible with some of the technologies and how quickly they're evolving. So it's pretty stressful trying to keep up with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I was asking, because I was just like, now in the research I was doing, oh, actually it was this week, uh, finance, legal, what was the other one? Oh, I'd have to look at my research I pulled together. Uh, those industries are having so much disruption.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, finance, legal. Nope, still can't think of it. I thought I was going to pull it out, but I didn't. Um,
Mhm.
but the amount of disruption is phenomenal,
Absolutely.
and the rules and laws around them are having such a hard time keeping up that
Mhm.
they're not. And
Yeah.
so we're starting to see those industries get crippled,
Mhm.
and other industries that weren't stuck in that construct are popping up because they're working outside the laws.
Yeah.
And it's it's fascinating. And I just started the research this week, and I'm going to keep looking into it because I actually came across it when I was doing something else, and I was like, oh, previously being a financial advisor, I kind of get interested in it. And so
Mhm.
I was like, that makes sense, because even I remember when I was taking all the series tests you have to take,
Mhm.
FINRA, I hate FINRA. But I
I
love
agree.
it, right?
Mhm.
Like it's one of those things that it's like, but their model's old. They need to
Yeah.
be testing differently, right? And so
Mhm.
I was going through this and just thinking like you throw IT on top of that, an extremely crazy industry that's like on speed,
Mhm.
and putting it on these industries that haven't experienced the disruption yet, and
Mhm.
what is legal and what's not legal. It'll be really fascinating to see how that comes out. Um,
Well, what's interesting is we're I think I think this is kind of the new paradigm. I think because of the polarization that's happened, in this country for certain, um, there's this tribalism, and you've got the left and you've got the right. And what we're going to see is these massive swings back and forth. So right now we're swinging red, and everything is deregulated. Everything is we're rolling back a lot of the draconian, some would argue, regulations that were put in place by the blue team. So we're going back and forth between blue and red and blue and red. So what's going to happen is every 4 years, there's going to be a massive swing one way or the other. And you may even get to the point where that time horizon shrinks to 2 years, because then you've got midterm elections, and then you're going to get a swing between, Congress is going to shift left and right. So it's going to be a nightmare. Regulators, even some of the regulatory bodies are changing outside of what was originally mandated by Congress for certain terms, for certain makeups of boards. So it's kind of the Wild West in fintech right now. And then, you mentioned that you've got these niche players that are coming in, and they're not, regulated banking authorities. They're not, they're flying under the radar because they're not banks in the traditional sense, but they're providing banking services to folks. And again, to go back to the generational divide, a lot of the millennials, they don't care. They're, whether it's Chime or some other fintech that says, hey, give us your money and we'll let you access it however you want, and we'll pay you a high yield. They're like, all right, fine. And they don't care. They don't know where that money is. They don't know that it's not backed by the FDIC or the NCUA or anything like that. They just assume it's a company. It's fine. Somebody on TikTok, an influencer, told them, this is where I put my money.
exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. It's alarming and scary watching it. And I think like to your point too, with like the politics, we're going to, I have a theory that it's because it'll all break down eventually, because they're, regardless of what your thoughts and beliefs are, the underlying consistent theme is division.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
so when you look at, well, why do you divide people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, historically, which if you're busy scrolling, you don't know the history. Historically, you divide people to conquer people.
Yep.
So now what? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that in America? You take down their companies and their corporations. And that's why I'm so passionate about people starting businesses. I'm like, for
Mm-hmm.
God's sakes, please start a business. I don't
Yep.
care if you're a florist or if you have created the next new programming language. I'm here
Mm-hmm.
for it. Like, you know, because once you do that, and right now, just because my business employees are all over the world, I see it in these other countries happening too,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yep.
everyone models America. So
Mm-hmm.
they're like, well, let's just destroy this across, divide all of the people.
Yep.
So I mean, that's my whole thing on it, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about the things that I do, because I'm like, please, for God's sakes, have control over your mind and your being.
Well, I
But
think it's interesting. As a business owner, you're staked. Like, you have a financial stake in how you communicate, how you do business, how you behave. So I think in some ways that's a little bit of a level set. And I think you might think twice about maybe saying something abrasive, or maybe going too far, or being a Karen or a Chad or anything like that, because it could impact your bottom line. It could impact your wallet. So
yeah,
I think there needs to be some danger out on the extremes that pushes everybody a little bit more into the center, makes them feel more human, makes them engage with a human being, and be a little caring. Don't be an ass to people all the time, and that would fix it all. It's not always about the other side's wrong. It's not always about you're always right. It's, you got to find common ground, and just have a conversation with somebody is impossible. There is no civil discourse anymore. Everything is all about I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, and you're wrong. And because of that, you must not exist. And I don't understand where that comes from.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yes, I 100% agree with what you're saying. It is confusing as all can be to me. And that's why I think it's so important. I mean, burnout is just a piece of having those things stripped away from you.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's like, it's as simple as core values and boundaries.
I can, send me all of the stuff that you have that you want to share. I'll make sure we attach it. We'll put it in the, like the show description and all that kind of stuff. And I think that'll be super useful. I think a lot of people, I hope, I've got, again, tens of listeners. I hope, this grows and people find this kind of stuff. And, I find it interesting, even just to talk about. And so I wrote down all of your tm.org and your Dr. Travers. And, I'm going to look into these things. And that's why I do these things, because this is how I absorb knowledge. This is how I learn. This is how I grow. And that's just another tool. So whatever you provide, I absolutely will share. And it's great stuff. I love it.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, I'll get that together and send it over to you, because I think it'll help your listeners. And hopefully, especially since you're new, if they see that there's like resources being shared, they might be like, oh, this is valuable to subscribe to. There's going to be more stuff in the future. So.
I very much try, again, it's just like my 10th or 12th the recording that I've done so far, but I'm trying to model what I do after Stephen Bartlett in his podcast. He does the Diary of a CEO podcast, and it's very well researched. He a lot of times puts together, sort of after show materials and for additional readings and stuff like that. So it's definitely a multimedia experience that I'm shooting for. So, additional readings, websites, books, anything is for me is just additional knowledge. So bring it on for sure.
Great. I will do that. This was great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jason.
I loved it. So if there's anything else you want to talk about, reach out. We can reconvene. We'll put a little buffer between them, and we can record it ahead of time, and I'll put it in the can, and I'll save it for a rainy day or something. I'm starting to talk like a broadcaster, but yeah, absolutely. If there's anything, I can do, if you want to chat in the future, just reach out for sure.
Sounds great. I definitely will. I think we have very similar thoughts based off of all the other stuff I've watched and read that you've put out. I'm like, I can
I'll
get
count you among my tens of listeners.